Oh, not at all. I mean, I think in Cairns you could drink wine anytime, to be honest, but particularly, I guess, red wines, because that's the cooler part of the year. And I know it's quite fashionable in summer to have red wines in the fridge. I think it's a great idea. And I know one of the locals today said how small they pour their sparklings. You have a little bit in the glass. That's to avoid the temperature rise in the glass. So your glass gets refilled more often. But it's a good time to be drinking wine. I tend to think probably younger wine, because often young wines have got a lot more zest and vibrancy, and something with a little bit of bottle age, say 3 or 4 years of bottle age. You get that lovely complexity, but you still get the primary fruit. So I would think more probably on the younger side. It's maybe in those winter months you have those 5, 10-year-old reds is the go. Well, I was thinking about that. It's an unusual show because, unlike a lot of other shows, I think you get a really good representation of some high-end wines here in the Cairns show. You really do, and this was noticed this show. I think in most classes we've got 2 or 3 golds or more, and the reason for that is I'm not exactly sure, but it just has this persona of attracting some really good wines. Depends a little bit on the variety. I mean, there is a lot of good cheap end wines that are extremely good, and unless you know your wines, it's a bit of taste and tell as well. But there are some beautiful wines out at low cost, and the reason for that is because there's only so much you can sell in the premium market. Most consumers don't spend too much over it, unless you're really into your wines, over $20 a bottle. So there is an abundance of really good quality and value wine under $20. The consumer is actually after single variety blends. They find it a little bit complicated with blends. People are demanding single variety. They get a little bit confused. That's probably an education thing when it comes to blends. And one of the things producers do follow now is the market that way. That's also led in a lot of these single vineyard wines. But look, there's some wonderful blended wines. If you look at the classic Australian Shiraz Cabernet or Cabernet Shiraz, and some of the things are trends. I mean, many years ago, there was a lot of Shiraz blended with Pinot Noir. That was very common, and now you don't see it. And so that will come back into vogue in years to come. These things all have their trends, but at the moment, there's quite a big emphasis on single varietal. And the big trend at the moment, particularly in white wine, I think, is multiple varieties. So people are after more of a really enjoyable drink. And a lot of those producers now are making blended white wines in particular. They're really lovely, complex, and they take the seriousness out of wine and say, well, this is just a lovely drink. And that's actually, statistics on those sort of blended whites here and overseas now has actually increased a lot. Well, the stainless steel versus oak is really a varietal thing. I mean, for argument's sake, you could have a Riesling in oak. There's no reason you can't have Riesling, Semillon, these floral varieties, but their actual characters aren't expressed well with oak. They're better off without them. Not to say you can't, there's no right or wrong in winemaking, but generally they're soft, they're floral, delicate fruit varieties, so you don't really necessarily need that oak component. Probably with Semillon is more forgiving than, say, Riesling. But for instance, Chardonnay is quite the opposite. It's a more robust grape, as in it's picked at a higher alcohol. And because it's higher alcohol, it actually adapts better to the barrel. So if you're fermenting barrel, that helps extract the oak. And you make a lot more complex wines and a bigger canvas. So it's just better suited. Not to say that you couldn't have unoaked Chardonnay. There's a lot of unoaked Chardonnays there, because in the past, I guess the industry has gone down the path of having, sometimes our wines have been over-oaked. I think the industry has addressed that really well in the last 10 years. There's some beautiful, beautiful Chardonnays being made now. Oak is to support the fruit of the wine. There's not a given rule that you should or shouldn't use it, but it does add complexity. And normally more your floral varieties like Semillons, Traminas, Rieslings are the varieties you probably don't necessarily need oak in. Normally early harvest wines, you get better acid, you get a lot more fragrance, and sometimes we call them green characters. If you pick them too green, they taste like a green apple. So it's important the winemaker gets that maturity right. Otherwise, if they're too green, you get these nice florals, but it's just green lettucey. So as they mature on the vine, they get these more luscious, softer fruit characters. A lot more expressive, and as the grapes mature, you get better palate length of flavours too. That's a good question. The seed is, if you have a really cool growing season, sometimes the seeds don't develop well. And one of the ways of checking for a white variety or red variety is ripe or not, you squash the berry in the palm of your hand. If the grape got good colour and you look at the seed, and the seed's still a bit green, it's often a really good indicator it's not quite right. A brown seed is what you're looking for, particularly with reds. You can extract the seeds away from the pulp. It's not such a bad idea. It's not imperative, but more imperative is the stalk. Okay, so sometimes when you chew on a stalk, and some years they can be quite green tasting, which is not necessarily good character. But if they taste more mature and softer, that woody sort of character, then it's fine. So that's part of the wine making. You have to consider the stalk, the seeds. Yeah, it's all part of the fruit. Non-wooded varieties, obviously you can hop in the market quite quickly. So again, it depends on the style. If it's a Riesling or a Semillon, you can get them on the market. And some people love these cleaner, fresher, brighter, more slightly acid varieties. Perfect, you know. If you're requiring some sort of oak maturation, normally that takes some months, up to 6 months at least, and maybe 15 months for red. So it depends where these wines end up and how you want to price them. But obviously if you are putting a wine into wood, it's premium fruit because the barrels are expensive. So your cost per litre is expensive. So you do demand a more premium price. An older wine tends to be more valuable because, and to some degree it has to be more valuable because from a grower's point of view and a producer's point of view, you have that waiting time, okay? So you've invested in your fruit, you've made the wine, you've put it to bottle and it's resting. There is a cost to that, so that has to reflect in the price. And you would not do that unless you saw that as a premium wine. So generally speaking, the more expensive wines tend to be better wines, but not always the rule. There are some lovely wines out there that say can have 1 or 2 years bottle age and still be, say, under $20, which are excellent. Yeah. Wine's supposed to be fun. It's part of the food world. You know, there are no rights or wrongs. If you like to drink your wine a week after it's bottled and you love it, then that's the time to drink it. Personally, in the case of Semillon, I almost like them when they're 10, 15 years old, almost what they called over the hill. I mean, I tend to love those because they almost go into sherry-like. But that's not for everyone. You know, some people like them 1 or 2 years of age. I think, you know, bottled varietals, floral varietals like Riesling, Semillon, I think they're lovely. They've got that lovely primary fruit after 2 years or 3 years of bottle age with a hint of that lovely toastiness. So it's a good combination of both worlds. You get lovely primary fruit and honeyed characters, you know. So if you don't like those characters, then maybe drink them early. But there's no right or wrongs, and that's what such a lovely thing about the wine world, you know. It's sometimes we tend to be a bit too expressive. Who should do what? Who should drink what the trends are? I think it's a very personal thing. I'd probably tend to agree with that. I think the beer's a fun part, but it's a craft in itself. And as wine producers, wine makers, we love to see it. It's like food, you know. And there's a lot of small boutique breweries, you know, and we love to taste those as well. It's part of the same sort of industry. But I think wine, because it's such a seasonal thing, to me that's more an experience of flavour And that's what's so wonderful about the world of wine, because you have to make a wine according to the season. If you stick with a protocol of the same old thing each year, it's not very exciting to produce it, and the wines will be quite boring, I think. So it's about showing your skills and expression as to what's given to you on the palate, and to say, what can I do with this fruit? You know, it's not good fruit, it's great fruit, it's damaged fruit. Now and using your experience, what can I do with that? And that's part. So sometimes you'll have vintages that maybe, you know, for argument's sake, might have a bit of mould. That doesn't mean you can't make a good wine. And you look back on these wines and say, that was such and such a year, I remember that. And that's all part of the experience and the wonderful part of wine, yeah. Cairns Wine Awards, look, I think to be honest, it's been going 23 years now. I think it has a big place in the circuit because, as I mentioned before, there's this, we're seeing a lot of good wines coming through. Today we've given quite a few golds, and those gold medals haven't been given away, you know, they've earned their place. But we're also mindful, and this is I think how the show started, is what's a wine quality, wine style that suits the tropics. And you find with the judge, it is quite, in this humid condition, a challenge, particularly with red wine. But the challenge is out there, and I think you know, we're coming up with some really good results. But I think the other part of the Cairns Wine Show, because we are isolated to the main wine growing sectors, the industry does need to promote North Queensland. There's huge tourism here, you know. In 2014, tourism grew here 15%. There was 1.6 million overnight stayers in North Queensland, in this region, spending 1.7 billion. And in 2020, they're expecting that with domestic and international travel to go from 15 billion to 30 billion within the next 5 years. So I think, you know, promoting wine and food, I mean, there's so many hundreds of cafes and great restaurants in North Queensland. They also want to see this, you know, the growth of the wine industry to supporting. And so I think it's a very important role for wine quality, exposure of wine education. So I think it has a good spot, and it's been well supported over those 23 years.
There's still